The seventh topic of the exam is called Working with Filters. Now this is a shorter topic than the other topics in the exam, because here mainly what you need to understand is how to use the filters in Photoshop in a non-destructive way. And for that, we will have to learn how to use smart filters. So in this first video, in the overview, I'm going to teach you everything you need to know about applying filters that way. And then in the next video, I'm going to show you a couple of examples of filters being used as smart filters. So we will look at the camera raw filter, which is a new feature in CC. So there's a high chance that it will be in the exam. And there's also the blur gallery that we will have a look at, and also the two adjustments that can only be used non-destructively as smart filters. So there's the HDR toning and the shadow and highlights. So having said that, let's have a look at the first example, where I would like to show you that there are actually differences between color modes whenever you work with filters. So this image on the right is in RGB mode, and if we look at the filter menu, you can see that everything is available. So all the filters are there. If I go to this other image, which is now in CMYK color mode, then if I check filter menu, you can see there's already a couple of things missing, like no camera raw filter, no lens correction, no oil paint, no vanishing point, no video filters at all. And then there might be also a couple of options missing, like lens flare and lighting effects. So these are the filters that are not available in CMYK color mode. And that's good to remember it, because it might be a question in the exam. Now, what is the advantage of a smart filter to a normal filter? Well, let's just try using a filter on this image. And I'm just going to make a selection first of all. So I would like to blur out the top part of this image. So I'm going to use the quick mask mode and use the gradient tool and make a selection. So I would like to only affect the top bit of this image, and then I press Q again. So I have a nice gradient selection. If I go then to the filter menu and I choose maybe blur and I choose Gaussian blur, then I can blur out the top bit of the image and maybe just reduce the blur a little bit, something like that. Now if I click on OK, you can see that we applied the blur, but this is applied in a destructive way because it actually changed the contents of this layer. The only way I can make changes to it is to go back or use the fade command from the edit menu. But that's not really a non-destructive way. The non-destructive way would be to turn the layer, the image itself, before we apply this effect, into a smart object. So I right click on the layer and choose convert to smart object. And once we have that ready, and then we can create our selection again. So let me just create that selection once more. And I go back to the filter menu and choose Gaussian blur. That will apply the same options that we used. But in this case, it will become a smart filter, which has even the selections stored as a mask. So this is a much more smarter way to work with filters, because I can always turn it off. You can see now it's turned off. I can turn it back on, and I can double click on Gaussian blur to make amends to it. So I can increase the radius, for example, and then I can even select the mask and use my gradient tool to make changes to the gradient as well. So I can decide where I would like that blur to show on my image. When you use a smart filter mask, that will affect all the filters applied onto the same smart object, because you can have more filters, and each time you add the filter to the same smart object, they will be in the same list of smart filters. So make sure you select the image first of all, and not the mask. So I have the image selected, the smart object in this case, and then go to the filter menu and choose your next filter you want to apply. In this case, I will probably just apply one of the stylized options, maybe emboss, something like that. I click on OK. You can see that the mask, the smart filter mask, will affect both of these filters. So I can shift click on it to turn it off, and then the emboss will affect the whole image, plus the Gaussian blur as well will affect the whole image. And I can turn them off separately. So individually I can see how they look like when I apply them to the image. And if I want to, I can always get rid of one of these smart filters by right-clicking on it and choose delete smart filter. So I'm just going to delete Gaussian blur. By the way, when you have 2 or more smart filters on the same image, you can also change their order by dragging up and down each of them. So that might change the effect, what you will see on your images. There's a little icon here on the right for each of the smart filters. And if you click on them, you will get the blending options for the smart filter. So you can choose blend mode for the filter, and you can change its opacity as well, which serves as like an intensity or fade effect. So we can see the applied changes on the image already. When we have the mask turned back on, the smart filter mask, we can see that in the properties panel, mask edge is not available. So these are the 3 different types of masking options we have here in the properties panel. First of all, layer mask and then vector mask. And this icon represents the filter mask. It's also good to memorize these icons because that also can be a question in the exam. They show you an image of this and they ask you what is this icon is doing in the properties panel. So now you know that is the smart filter masks icon. And also remember that you don't have mask edge available for smart filter masks. If you have another image or another smart object in the same document, which I'm just going to use the type tool for creating a new layer, I'm just going to type in fashion, make it bigger. And then I'm going to turn this into a smart object. Actually, I'm going to turn it into white. And then I right click and convert to smart object. So if I alt click and drag one of my smart filters from one a layer, a smart object layer, I can drag it onto another one. So that's a fast way to copy and paste smart filters that you already used in your document. It can also be a question in the exam that how can you achieve creating smart filters? Well, for that you need to know how to turn the layer into a smart object first of all. So in this case, for example, if I want to use a smart filter on this text layer, then I can either right click on the layer and choose convert to smart object, which I prefer to do, or go to the panel menu and choose convert to smart object from there. Or you can go to the layer menu and go under smart objects, convert to smart object. Or the last place where you can also do is go to the filter menu and choose convert for smart filters. And last but not least, it's also good to know that in the layer menu under smart object, you can find additional options like export contents and replace contents of smart objects. When you export the contents of a smart object from Photoshop, the layer will be saved into a PSB format if the smart object was created in Photoshop. If a file was placed into your Photoshop document as a smart object, then it will be exported with the original file format. So for example, if it was an EPS file or an Illustrator file, then the export contents option will use that file format automatically. And of course, you can always rasterize a smart object, which will also rasterize the smart filters on it. And that's all I wanted to show you in this overview. In the next video, as I said, we will take a look at a couple of examples of filters being used as smart filters.